Folks, we have a crisis on our hands and it's not getting any better. In fact, we're headed beyond this recession to what I believe is an absolute depression. And for anyone watching this will have a major impact on your life. And for anyone under 40 in particular, you are going to be a slave. That's right, a slave to this financial mess these politicians have caused. And it's not fair to you at all, but you must open your eyes to what they are doing to you. But also realize this, there are ways for you to get through this quite successfully, but you cannot bury your head in the sand. Look, as you all know, inflation is through the roof, right? Energy costs have skyrocketed, the stock and bond markets are catering, gold, silver, Bitcoin, housing, you name it, it's all down and going down further. But you have to prepare yourself. You can't sit around with your head buried in the sand hoping everything's going to work, because what I've witnessed for far too long in the years I've been doing this, working with thousands of individuals, it's that too many people are hoping that everything will work out on its own. But let me tell you this, hope is not a financial strategy. So I want to address what's going on in the United Kingdom. That's right, the United Kingdom. But before you check out and say, well, this doesn't pertain to me, you must realize that this is a big story that not many people are talking about. But you need to understand what's happening there. It's really, really important, because what they are doing in the UK will likely start a snowball around the world, particularly here in the US. So stick with me. This is going to be a very, very important episode. Hi, welcome to another episode of Wired for Wealth, guiding you to achieve lasting financial freedom and peace of mind. I'm your host, John MacGregor, your antidote to your financial struggles. And if you haven't already done so, you know what to do. Ring that bell below and hit subscribe. All right, let's dig in. Look around the world and you'll see stock markets have crashed, right? Bond markets have blown up, interest rates are rising fast, and many currencies are collapsing as well. This is all having major ramifications on families and individuals trying to survive, businesses, banks, and countries. But I want to spend some time here talking about the United Kingdom, because it's a very important story for everyone regardless of where you live. Because what happens there, as I said earlier, may very well likely happen everywhere, especially here in the US. As Peter Schiff, the financial commentator and CEO of Euro Pacific Capital, says, no one rings a bell. No one rings a bell. What he means is that there's no warning when there's a major event in the markets. They come and they come fast. But last week he says we got the mother of all bells. And he's right. With inflation soaring in the UK at a 10% clip, well, that's what they report actually, it's much higher than that, the Bank of England suddenly changed course and implemented what we call quantitative easing. This is in direct contrast to what they said they would do in order to tame inflation, which was quantitative tightening. Quantitative easing, stay with me here, or QE, is the monetary policy that got us all into this inflationary mess in the first place. And now they're going back to it. Essentially, quantitative easing is the central bank buying bonds and flooding the economy with printed, or really what I like to call it is printed with monopoly money, flooding the economy with monopoly fake money. What this does is it keeps interest rates low and props up asset prices. It's the main reason we've been in this 15-year bull market in stocks, bonds, and housing. And this all started as a result of the housing and mortgage crash in 2008. The central banks implemented QE, quantitative easing, in order to stimulate the economy. Making sense? The problem here is that they never stopped with quantitative easing. And this is especially true here in the US. They just kept printing and printing more fake money. And essentially what this does is create asset bubbles in stocks, bonds, housing, you name it. But it's all artificial. And when COVID hit and supply chains seized up, all that money they were borrowing and pouring into the economy, chasing fewer and fewer goods, drove prices through the roof when the COVID restrictions were lifted. So to combat this, what they do is the central bank needed to control the money supply by taking money out of the economy by raising interest rates and implementing what they call quantitative tightening, the opposite of quantitative easing. Quantitative tightening is selling bonds into the marketplace, taking money out of the economy, pushing bond prices lower, which in turn raises interest rates. And by raising interest rates, this slows the growth of the economy, the spending by consumers, thus lowering interest rates to tame inflation. Does that make sense? You may need to watch that again. In the UK, as Peter Schiff said, it was literally Big Ben that rang, because this big bell that went off is in London, right? And up until this point, the head of the UK Bank of England, this Andrew Bailey, said he was going to be very aggressive in tackling inflation. He was taking what they call a very hawkish stance and would raise rates, implement quantitative tightening in order to tame inflation. He was talking very tough, as our Fed chief here, Jerome Powell, is doing now. Well, for now he is anyway. The UK bank chief, Andrew Bailey, said he would do what it took, no matter the cost or the pain it would cause. He was on a mission to slow the economy down in order to bring down inflation. Well, that didn't last long. Essentially, he folded like a cheap suit. And now he's back to flooding the economy with more fake money. So what happened? Well, as you see my episodes before, I talk a lot about pensions. And pensions around the world are in trouble, big trouble. And that's no exception in the UK. Bond holdings in these UK pensions have basically blown up. And this is putting a huge squeeze on the pension managers' ability to maintain their obligations to the people who were promised pension benefits. Here's the deal. When interest rates were basically at zero, right? Remember those days? Not too long ago. The pension managers had to figure out a way to increase the returns in order to meet their obligations. The problem is these bonds that they had in their portfolio were paying, less than 1%, if just over 0%. So what they did was, in order to increase the returns, they used those current bond holdings as collateral to borrow money to buy longer term bonds with higher interest rates. But what's the problem here? When interest rates rise, as they have, and have very quickly, right? Those current bonds they have, that they hold, they get crushed. And the cost to service those new loans soars. What happened is they're in a position where they were going to get a margin call. It's a total squeeze. And what is the media saying? Of course, if you're a conservative, you're going to get blamed for this, right? The new Prime Minister of the UK, Liz Truss, she's a pro-growth conservative, came out with what you would expect, a pro-growth plan to get the UK's economy up and running again. And in typical fashion, the left-wing media pounced. She offered tax cuts that weren't really, in fact, big. In fact, they basically just canceled future tax increases. She wanted deregulation in various sectors to get businesses producing, and she wants to return to fracking to bring down energy prices, which they sorely need. The people of the UK sorely need that. But here's the deal. The prospect of her even getting these bills passed are questionable. So even though she announces these pro-growth things, it doesn't mean that they were actually going to go through. But of course, the media had a meltdown over this. Why? Because they don't want her plan to work. Really, I guess you could say disgusting. But the real blame here is the pension managers, who were never prepared for inflation and higher interest rates. So what they do? They begged the central bankers to step in and bail them out. Does this sound familiar? And that's exactly what's happening. Look, as the great economist Milton Friedman said, and I'm summarizing, said inflation is made by the central banks because only the central banks can print money. Now the Bank of England is saying that all they want is to maintain orderly markets. That's just happy talk, folks. You can't fight inflation and maintain an orderly market at the same time. Bringing down inflation is painful and will require a disorderly market. That's just reality. So what'd they do? They caved. And now that they decided to change course on a dime and go back to quantitative easing, in other words, back to flooding the economy with more phony British pounds, what's going to happen? Don't expect inflation to come down anytime soon. In fact, you can expect the opposite. It's going to get worse. All that tough talk by the bank's chief, Andrew Bailey, was smoke and mirrors. When the things got tough, he ran and caved. So, what does this mean for the US, and why is this important for you living in the United States, and why I'm glad you're still watching this? Our Fed chief is watching this very closely, and I'm afraid he's going to cave just like the UK did. After all, he's political, and he wants to keep his job. And by raising interest rates and tightening the money supply, he's only going to slow the economy even more, which will make his boss, Joe Biden, look even worse than he is today. So why not throw some more monetary kerosene on the fire, blow those asset bubbles back up, and let the party continue? After all that tough talk from our Fed chief Powell will prove in the end he's just a paper tiger. So just watch for what I call now the Powell pivot, because I think when he sees this, it's going to give him permission to reverse course, implement quantitative easing again, send inflation up even higher, but it will prop up the stock and bond market and the housing market. It's a vicious cycle that never ends. Well, I hope that was helpful. And I really hope that makes you think about what's really going on today. And this should all be a clear wake-up call to you and what you hear in the media or by politicians, because typically what you hear in the media or by politicians is usually just a ruse. These big plans like Build Back Better or the Inflation Reduction Act, student loan forgiveness, etc. I can go down the list of all these happy titles. These are all giant scams designed to keep them in power, no matter the devastation they cause on you, your family, your job, your business, and definitely your country. And just because these policies sound good, or they may even feel good emotionally, does not mean they do good in the end. A huge distinction between feeling good and actually doing good. So the next time you hear of some big spending bill with a feel-good title like the Inflation Reduction Act, which, by the way, all independents have shown that the Inflation Reduction Act will do nothing for inflation. In fact, most independent studies say it will add to inflation. All of these fancy, happy talk titles should be a red flag going up and really should force you to do your own homework on what's reality. Most likely they are just pulling wool over your eyes, creating more and more slave conditions over your financial life. With that, until next time, upward and onward, take care.